Good morning, everyone. I'm Josh Minkler. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana. Yesterday at 6 o'clock in the morning, 130 federal agents, inspectors, troopers, deputies, and United States Marshals served search and arrest warrants at 13 locations. This was a culmination of an investigation combining federal, state, and local resources. It lasted a little bit over 4 months. It was a investigation brought to the federal authorities from the Kokomo Police Department into a violent drug trafficking organization in Kokomo, Indiana area. The operation name was Operation Law and Order. In our investigation, we identified a federal targets and identified a federal organization. The members of that organization you see to my right, their primary goal was to infest this community with guns, methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. The primary individuals indicted in a federal indictment are on the board in front of you. The indictment has been provided for you. Some of the principal and primary members of this organization include the leader of the organization, Reggie Ballantyne, also known as Pudge. Pudge was responsible for obtaining quantities of drugs, bringing those drugs into the Kokomo area, and in charge of the distribution operation. The source of supply for the drugs was also identified, individual from Macon, Georgia, Pierre Riley. Riley would send the drugs down to Reggie Ballantyne, also known as Pudge, using couriers. Reggie Ballantyne had a couple of lieutenants, right-hand men. Michael O'Bannon was identified as one of those, also known as Lunchy, and Perry Jones. Those individuals are identified in the indictment as primarily responsible for the distribution of controlled substances here in the Kokomo, Indiana area. Ballantyne used an individual to store drugs and drug proceeds and count the money. That individual, as identified in the indictment, is Kristen Kinney, also known as Cupcake. Reggie Ballantyne also used individuals throughout the community to distribute those drugs. Those individuals have been charged. They're identified in the indictment as Michael Jones, aka MJ, Jason Reed, Deshaun Everhart, and Derek Owens. Other individuals have been charged federally. 2 individuals have been charged by a federal criminal complaint that are also members of this organization. That criminal complaint has been provided to you. Those individuals were involved in getting a shipment of drugs brought from the Macon, Georgia area or it was intended to come to Kokomo. Law enforcement was able to interdict those drugs in Georgia before they ever made it here. The amount of drugs interdicted from a bus station actually, were about 10 pounds of methamphetamine and 1 pound of cocaine. The 2 individuals responsible for that shipment coming here to Kokomo from Georgia are Sean Myers and Melissa Baird. Melissa Baird is currently a fugitive. She is the one individual we have not found and not arrested. So Melissa Baird, if she is out there and listening to this, it'd probably be in her best interest to turn herself in and do it the easy way. Also indicted for activities in this drug trafficking organization is an individual named DeAndre Jones. DeAndre Jones was a heroin dealer for this organization, and in December and January dealt heroin while armed. Those are the individuals that are named and charged federally and have been taken into federal custody. As I mentioned, there were search warrants served. The search warrants that were served, federal agents, state troopers, local police found exactly what we expected to find, including large quantities of drugs, 17 pounds of methamphetamine, 2 pounds of cocaine, 2 ounces of heroin, 122 grams of fentanyl. Now, I know 122 grams doesn't sound like a lot to people, but if people understand how lethal fentanyl is, a tenth of a gram is fatal. That's a fatal amount. So you can do the math when you're talking about 122 grams of something where a tenth of a gram can be fatal. That was recovered, as well as $37,000 in drug proceeds, all seized as a result of these search warrants. In addition to that, 24 guns were seized as part of these search warrants, including 2 assault rifles and a sniper's rifle. Federal law is pretty straightforward on gun possession. If you're a drug dealer, you're not allowed to possess a gun. If you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to possess a gun. So all of these guns were possessed illegally. They were illegally possessed guns under federal law. Let me also mention something about the way these arrests and searches were done yesterday, and you all should know this. No shots were fired. Nobody was injured. None of the defendants, nobody from law enforcement, no citizens were injured. And this was a massive, and I mean massive, operation yesterday. So you should understand that. I'd like to make a couple observations for all of you, and then sort of recognize the fine group of law enforcement behind me who put this case together. As I stand here as the United States Attorney, I observe what many others have observed. There is a challenge in this community and a challenge to so many other communities. Drug dealers have chosen, for whatever reason, to make their business, to set up their businesses in Indiana. And the consequences we have seen in this state and in this community. I would say that everybody in this room, and I'd be surprised if there's somebody that doesn't, everybody in this room knows somebody, a relative, a friend, an acquaintance that has been impacted by drugs. They know family members, they know friends, they know people that have been hurt by drugs and drug addiction. Drug overdoses in this country are more than 64,000. Drug overdoses are the leading cause of death for people under 50. That is as big a challenge as federal, state, and local law enforcement can have, and federal, state, and local law enforcement must work together to respond to that challenge. And that response must be consequential. Law and order, this operation, we used massive federal resources. No expense was spared to target these individuals. And the response was consequential. And what the price that these individuals will pay for setting up their business in this district must also be consequential. The drug penalties in this country are harsh in federal court, and they are necessarily harsh. First offense, 10 years to life. Mandatory minimum of 10 years. That's for your first offense. Second offense, 20 years to life. And let me explain to you what it means to go to federal prison. When you go to federal prison, you go to Yankton, South Dakota. You go to Compton, California. You don't go to some community corrections halfway house. You are inside a wall. Third offense for drug trafficking, federal prison, life without the possibility of parole. Life in federal court is life. You show up to federal prison, you fill out a form that says, when you die, where do you want the remains to go? Those are the consequences for drug trafficking. The consequences must be harsh to end this problem, and they must be necessarily harsh. Indiana and the Southern District of Indiana will be the most inhospitable place in this country to deal drugs. And that will turn this crisis around. And let me make it clear, and this is my second point. The individuals that are charged, the individuals on this board, are drug dealers. They are not drug addicts. These are defendants that are charged that are making money. They are making blood money off of drug addicts. If you have a drug addiction problem, our message has always been very simple: get treatment. If you are dealing drugs, making this blood money, infesting our communities with addiction, you will pay a price, and that price will be harsh. That needs to be clear. Third message: there has been sort of a myth that's been circulated. People don't like the war on drugs, so they circulate a myth. That myth is this: drug dealers are these benevolent, kindly individuals that are just trying to make money for their families. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is not Robin Hood and their merry group of men getting money from the rich and giving it to the poor. These are violent drug dealers. You can see the results of the search warrant: 24 guns. 24 guns taken off the street. Besides the devastating toll, and it's a devastating toll, that drug dealing causes through addiction and overdose deaths, drug dealing, drug trafficking is inextricably intertwined with the gun violence in our country and in this community. The two go hand in hand. Drug dealers cannot go to the police. They cannot go to the courts to resolve their disputes. And therefore, the drugs or the cash they possess must be protected by the credible threat of violence. Extreme violence if you don't pay. And that is why it's very common around the country to find drug dealers just like these guys, armed to the teeth. They're armed to the teeth with drugs to protect, with guns to protect their drugs and to protect their drugs money. And that's clear in this case. And certainly we had a very serious situation that was resolved favorably for public safety with the help of the Kokomo Police Department and our friends at the Howard County Prosecutor's Office. In late February and early March of 2018, Mr. Riley, the source of supply, Mr. Ballantyne, also known as Pudge, and Mr. O'Bannon, also known as Lunchy, believed that they had identified an individual in this community that was responsible for the theft of money and drugs. I'm not going to name that individual because of victims' rights, but they believed they had identified that individual. And so they did what drug dealers did. They paid $7,500 to have that individual killed. Let me repeat that. Because of that, they paid $7,500 to have that individual killed. They hired 2 hitmen, as disclosed in federal documents, from Georgia to come to Kokomo to have that individual killed. Law enforcement did what they always did, and they intervened. On March 2nd, 2018, after identifying the 2 hitmen through surveillance, Jamel Williamson and Sarah Quaidar, they were interdicted at the Quality Inn out on Lincoln Road. O'Bannon, the individual on this board, had $7,000. That was partial payment to be made for the murder for hire. Williamson, up here from Georgia, Quaidar, Quadir, up here from Georgia. Williamson had an active warrant for murder. He had a loaded 30-round magazine with him. And in the Quality Inn out at Lincoln Road where they were staying, they had 2 semi-automatic firearms. They had all black clothing, pants, shirts, hoodies, which they just purchased hours earlier at the Walmart. Of course, neither one was legally authorized to possess a firearm. $7,000 up here to take somebody out. Those things in their possession, I think you can do the math. I want to thank and publicly acknowledge the Howard County prosecutor for stepping in and charging both of those individuals for possession of firearms by serious violent felons. But I think the message is clear. Generally, drug traffickers are inextricably intertwined with the level of violence that you've seen in this community and we've seen all around the country. Clearly, here is the same case, and thanks to the quick and accurate action of federal, state, and local law enforcement combining their talents, serious violent crimes in this community were prevented. One other observation I want to make, and I made this a little bit earlier, and that's about the professionalism of law enforcement in Indiana. I've described this organization. I think everybody is now getting the picture of what law enforcement had to deal with. Drug traffickers with criminal histories that were armed. They were arrested. Not one shot was fired. Nobody was hurt. I think if you look at the way this investigation was conducted, the Constitution of the United States of America was followed in every single case to the T. Judicial authorization was sought every time to do the techniques we did. Judicial authorization was sought to execute the search warrants that we executed. The individuals were charged after these facts that I've talked to you about were presented to a grand jury, a group of ordinary citizens, to decide whether we'd done the right thing and whether these people should be charged. The Constitution was followed. Nobody was injured. You can turn on the TV or open up the paper any time and hear stories about law enforcement misconduct. That's going to be on the front page. It's going to be the top story every time. This is a story which is clear, which has been my experience now, being in law enforcement since 1989 in this community, and that is law enforcement does everything the right way. They do it professional, and they follow the Constitution. And I think that should be noticed, appreciated, and commended in this community, because you don't hear it enough. Nobody comes up to a police officer, a federal agent, a prosecutor, and say, thank you for doing your job, and they should hear it, because they did it in this case well. In fact, I'd say they did it exceptionally well. And the last thing I want to talk about is the team behind me. I talked about it a little earlier. I've been doing this since 1989. I've been in federal court since 1994, and the law enforcement teams that we have right now have never been better. And they need to be that good. As many of you know, we have huge challenges that we face. Challenges of gun violence in our communities that we've never experienced before. Challenges of overdose deaths, records that we've never faced before. And we have to have a great team to respond to those challenges. A lot of people are going to say, these are intractable problems. They cannot be fixed. There's nothing we can do about it. These problems, drugs and guns and violence, they're out of control. Well, they're only out of control if people fail to control it. And we are not going to stand by on the sidelines and let these problems run out of control. We are going to control it. We are going to respond in a consequential way. And we believe cases like this, cases like we just did in this community, will make this community safer. It will be safer. It is safer today than it was yesterday. These cases will result in less overdose deaths. There are less overdose deaths that will happen tomorrow than happened the day before because of what these guys did. We believe gun violence will go down. And the reason it will go down is because of what these guys did. So we have the team in place to answer these public safety challenges. And we, this group right here, will make a difference for this community and for the Southern District of Indiana. So thank you very much. But I do want to take some time to recognize the fine group of federal law enforcement agents, state law enforcement, local law enforcement, and even elected officials who didn't have to support these efforts but supported it completely. So first, I want to introduce the lead agency in this case was the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration is the Assistant Special Agent in charge. He's the head of DEA for Indiana, Greg Westfall. Greg?
Thanks, Josh. So good morning, everybody. Mr. Minkler's always very thorough in his comments, and so it's going to take me a minute to kind of go through. I think he copied some of my comments, but we won't go there. But first of all, first and foremost, it's been said, but I've got to say it from the lead law enforcement agency. Thank you to all my federal, state, and local partners. These type of operations cannot be done without their help, without their coordination, and without their willingness to bring investigations that they've already started and recognize that, hey, we could use the feds in this to help us get to a different level. And truly, that is the mark of professionalism. To know when to say, hey, you know what? We can do better. And so when we get in there that we can't arrest our way out of this problem, you're absolutely right. And we never intended to do that. But what we do is strategically and systematically pick out organizations such as this one and put them away. That's what we do. And that can't be done without our local law enforcement partners right there standing beside us. As Mr. Minkler stated, you know, this was part of an overall, what's called an OCDEF investigation. Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force is what OCDEF stands for. The name, Law and Order, you have to pin a operation name to an OCDEF investigation. It was Law and Order. So in the news last night, everybody wanted to know about the bright blue t-shirts. And here they are. And let me kind of tell you what the purpose of that is behind the bright blue t-shirts. On that morning, yesterday morning, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we all gathered together as law enforcement. Some of us never even saw each other before. Some of us don't even know each other. So what do? How do we identify? Who's in charge? Those are all things that are planned out during operations like this. It came up by one of my group supervisors, John Grandine, who actually runs the group that's responsible for this investigation. He said, hey, look, it's going to be dark. We got to have somebody, we got to have everybody know how to recognize who knows about the investigation. Because we had SWAT teams out there, everything else. Hey, let me tell you, SWAT teams go out, reasonably so. They're not meant to be seen in the daylight or in the darkness. They have to do things under the cover of darkness. These stand out. So all anybody ever had to do was look and say, where's the blue shirt? Okay, that person can answer a question. It's the only thing behind this shirt. I heard a couple comments on the news yesterday, and I just wanted to clarify that. But that was an ingenious thing by the group supervisor, because it made things go seamless. But the OCDEF program is DOJ's cornerstone project to fight organized crime and drug trafficking. And as Mr. Minkler stated, you know, over 130 professional law enforcement officers conducted an enforcement operation with not one law enforcement officer injured and not one defendant or individual or citizen injured or shot at. Not one shot was fired. It's pretty impressive. And that doesn't go unnoticed, and it should not, because that takes a lot of coordination by myself and Chief Baker, and we had a lot of midnight calls to discuss how we were going to accomplish this. Mr. Minkler hit on the fact that the CDC in 2016 reported over 64,000 drug overdose deaths. All right? In Kokomo, Indiana, your paper reported a record-breaking 44 drug overdose deaths here in Kokomo. Those were your statistics. The drugs attributed to this in that article ranged from heroin, methamphetamine, and synthetics such as spice. So you already heard the amounts of drugs seized in the investigation, and because of the tireless work of the investigators, those drugs were not allowed to poison your community. That's important. Did we take care of the drug problem completely yesterday? No, we never said we wanted to, or we want to, but we never said we would. This is a continued project, and we got to keep fighting. People actually, I heard a lot of other comments. How did this case begin? Maybe we can find out. Well, let me tell you how the case really actually began. I don't think I'm, giving up any trade secrets. This investigation, believe it or not, started out as a pharmaceutical pill case worked by our tactical diversion squad. Now, people will ask, what is a tactical diversion squad in DEA? This is an innovative technique that DEA management came up with to combine the skill set of a diversion investigator who is regulatory in nature and knows about registrants, and combine that with a special agent with the DEA. Use those skill sets and identify and focus on the registrants and those hospitals and those doctors of the pharmaceutical drugs that are being distributed in your communities. Well, guess what? What we found out during our venture with this, and this has been going on for a while, is that the street drug dealers understand the profit-making ability for pharmaceutical pill sales. Why do you think Indiana was #1 in 2015 for pharmacy robberies? Pills have value. There's other ways to get pharmaceutical drugs than to get it from a doctor. Those things are being curbed, and things such as the TDS squad are going to help us overcome this opioid epidemic. We're going to run into other cases, and I'm not going to pull that case from those guys to say, oh, this now focuses on methamphetamine. That's not fair. So that's how this works. That's how this is done. As Mr. Minkler stated, drug trafficking and violence go hand in hand, and investigations, this investigation particularly prevented overdoses and acts of violence. This drug trafficking organization was structured like a cartel, all right, and operated domestically here in Kokomo, Indiana. And I want to make something else very clear, and that is this. This organization was obtaining methamphetamine, bulk amounts of methamphetamine and other drugs, and they were redistributing those drugs not only in Kokomo, but Indianapolis, Indiana, and as far west as Terre Haute, Indiana. They had people redistributing their drugs down there and profiting from that. The drugs dealt, sold, transported, and seized in Kokomo, Indiana came from the Mexican cartel. No doubt about it. This was not domestically made methamphetamine. This came from south of the border Mexican cartels. The way it was packaged, the way it looked, and the potency of it is all indicative of Mexican cartel dope. Here in Kokomo, people involved in this investigation used pharmaceutical fentanyl to make heroin stronger and to profit from that. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not used to fentanyl, you're going to die. But if you can make a profit, that's what these individuals do. But because of this investigation, it was stopped. Here in Kokomo, we prevented convicted felons from continuing to traffic firearms. You already heard the number from Mr. Minkler. Our message is clear. The DEA and our partners will continue to utilize resources at our disposal to target the highest level violators. So, if you're an addict, I suggest you get treatment. I encourage you to get treatment. However, if you're a criminal drug trafficking organization who is exploiting the weakness of addiction, like this organization did, you're next. You'll be on our radar, we'll get you identified, we'll make a case, and we'll present it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. In closing, I want everybody to remember this. You know, we hear a lot of things. How do we overcome this? Law enforcement is only one piece of this very difficult problem. We need the community organizations to stand by us and replace the bad with good. So we've eradicated some people. Now put good back into these communities. And also help us. If you know people who are addicted to drugs, please help us get them treatment. Reduce the demand of drugs, which will reduce your violence, which will reduce your gun trafficking. Get them help. Get them help, please. So as I talk about community, let's talk about what was posted yesterday, and then I'll close it. This is what the community said about the operation yesterday. Great help came. Need more of this. Too many people are dying. This isn't coming from me. This is social media talking. The druggies picked the wrong town, for sure. Don't underestimate police officers. That's a big mistake. I'm happy that that is off the streets, and prayers to our officers and all involved. As a law enforcement officer that's challenged every day with the bad that you see, those type of comments make me focused, and we're going again. So thank you very much. Thank you to my partners. Thank you, Mr. Minkler.
All right. I do want to acknowledge some of the federal partners that have been very helpful in this investigation. First, from alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and explosives. As you know, many firearms were seized. We have Jason Tortorisi. Jason, thank you. Also, the arrest of these individuals, dangerous individuals, and the tracking of the one fugitive could not be done without the United States Marshal Service. Our United States Marshal is here, Dan McClain. Thank you, Marshal. As you heard, the financial investigation, this is drug dealing is a business. Let's call it what it is, albeit an illegal business. These people are in it to make money. So the financial investigation is always a big help, and we always have to have it to put these guys away so that they won't get out. We have the SAC of the IRS, the special agent in charge of the IRS, Gabe Gershon from Chicago here. He was a big piece of this organization and for behind me in this investigation. So Gabe, would you say a few words?
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Wow, this is really a great example of what happens when we all work together. I'd like to echo a lot of the same things that that Josh and Greg were saying. First of all, I'd like to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office and all the prosecutors. As you can tell, Josh is a very passionate prosecutor, and that really makes our jobs a lot easier. So thank you to Josh, and thank you to all the AUSAs that assisted on this investigation. Again, our federal agencies that helped, the DEA, the lead agency, also ATF, FBI, Marshal Service, Postal Inspection, who assisted in the takedown of this criminal organization. But also definitely would like to echo them in thanking the state and local agencies who helped. As it's been mentioned, this operation went down without anybody getting hurt, without any shots fired, and that's really a testament to the partnership that we have with our state and local agencies. The Kokomo Police Department was really instrumental in providing us assistance with this case, which is really goes hand in hand with making sure that these operations are executed safely. I'd like to thank all the IRS agents, both here in Indiana, as well as the agents in Georgia that assisted in this case. I'm proud to be here to represent the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. Our goal is to assist our partners in dismantling the organizations that profit from the sale of these dangerous drugs. As we talked about, why does this organization exist? They're here to make money. These are crimes of greed, these are crimes of profit, and that's why we're involved in this investigation. Our special agents with the IRS, they have the expertise to conduct financial investigations. We look at where the money came from to purchase these narcotics to begin with. What did they do to promote the activity? What did they do to fund their expenses? We look at all of that. What happened to the money after it was collected? Did it go to purchase assets? We'll look at that. We're continuing to look at that in this case. Again, we'll work with our investigators to really trace the proceeds. We won't leave any stone unturned. We won't stop until we investigated every aspect of this investigation. Our agents are very thorough, and we will again continue to make sure that we're doing our part in this investigation. These drugs are very dangerous, and they're poisoning our communities. Our goal, even though we do work on the financial component, our goal is to really be involved in every aspect of this case. These arrests should send a clear signal that we'll continue to work aggressively together to bring these criminals to justice. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. The United States Postal Inspection Service was very helpful in this investigation, including yesterday's takedown. We're very appreciative of their efforts, and Dan Taylor's here. Dan?
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Just want to say the U.S. Postal Inspection Service is extremely proud to be a part of this investigation that's brought several violent criminals to justice and off the streets of Kokomo. This investigation, as has been said, really required the expertise and coordination of several different agencies that each brought their own special experience to allow this to go down successfully. Just want to say that by utilizing U.S. Mail as part of their distribution network, these criminals caught the attention of postal inspectors who worked tirelessly until these activities were exposed. Citizens hold a sacred trust in the safety of the mail, and while these illegal shipments betray that trust, they're also putting postal employees and anyone else that comes across or handles these packages at risk. Postal inspectors will continue to stand in the gap to ensure criminals go elsewhere or risk being exposed, and that the U.S. Mail remains safe for customers and employees alike. And just like to close again by appreciating all the cooperation between different agencies.
So I think I've recognized all of our federal partners, and they did some really great work. I can tell you, I've been overseeing these investigations for a long time, and I can't remember one that started with a federal investigator. Almost every single one of them started and was brought to us and was assisted by state and local law enforcement. The state and local law enforcement here in Indiana is as good as it is in any state in the country. When I travel around the country and talk to other U.S. attorneys, they always ask me, who am I fighting with? Who am I arguing with? Who do I don't get along with? And I'm like, everybody gets along. And they're like, what? But that's really the way things are done in Indiana. And we can't get it done without the state and locals. One thing that is sort of unique to federal investigation is that they are high risk because of the individuals we target. So people have to have some risk tolerance and some patience. It is not easy. It is difficult. We hope the payoff is worth it in the end, but you have to have the support in the community of your political leaders. In this community, federal law enforcement did have that support from their leader, and I just want to thank Mayor Greg Goodnight for that support and ask him for some remarks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Minkler, and thank you all for coming here this morning. Yesterday's successful raids illustrates the importance of collaborative police work. I commend the Kokomo Police Department, the DEA, the ATF, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and all the other law enforcement agencies that work together. Their collaboration took 15 drug dealers, high-powered weapons, and a large quantity of drugs off of our streets. Chief Rob Baker and all the federal agents, we're proud of you and the work you've done and the work of your teams. And we're thankful for your diligence as you built this case. One of the aspects of this case that I'm most proud of is how it originated locally. The first tip came from a concerned citizen at a Mayor's Night Out event. They came forward locally to inform us about suspicious activity. Chief Baker and the entire KPD Drug Task Force acted on this tip, and along with tips from other Kokomo residents, kickstarted a months-long chain of events that culminated in yesterday's raid. Police officers do their best work when they have active and engaged citizens, and our city works best when we have active and engaged citizens. These cases can take a great deal of time to build. The Kokomo Police Department Drug Task Force had been monitoring these locations and individuals for months. As the case developed, Chief Baker and I talked about the need for increased overtime. We agreed to use all necessary resources in order to do this right and get results. Our Kokomo police officers meticulously documented the criminal activity, and they ultimately discovered this to be part of a larger drug network. So thanks to the Kokomo Police Department Drug Task Force for collaborating with federal authorities when they uncovered these connections. And to my fellow citizens here in Kokomo, we need you to continue to be on the lookout and continue to report drug activity to our police department. And keep in mind, as this case demonstrated, be patient. Good police work does take time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, as many of you probably from this area already know, Chief Robert Baker, sort of the star of this show. I'm happy to recognize him for the fantastic police work his police department did in recognizing this as a valuable case that needed federal involvement. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. Yeah. I appreciate that, and I'm not the star of the show. The citizens of Kokomo really were the star of the show. As the mayor stated, it was because of them, and they did not go out into their neighborhoods and turn a blind eye to this. We've worked hard over the last 11 plus years to make those citizens aware in our citizen police academies, different aspects, to give them the tools to know what's right and wrong in their neighborhoods. And I would tell you, it's been huge. It's been a huge assistance to us, a huge assistance to Kokomo, Indiana, when those neighbors contact us, when those citizens contact us and say, hey, there's something wrong in our neighborhood, it's not right. We know it's not right. Therefore, I can go to my special units, to my police officers alone, but in this case, the Kokomo Police Department's Drug Task Force, and say, hey, you know, here's some information. Let's see what's going on over in this neighborhood. And they took that information and they ran with it. And they did an excellent job at what they do. And I would put that group up against anybody in this country, any task force in this country, because they are that good. The thing is, like we've all mentioned, patience. It's hard to be patient. These guys know how I was impatient. why aren't we doing something? Let's go, let's hit these people. Well, every one of those people on that board, but maybe one person, has been arrested several times. You guys probably already know that. Check it out. We've done our job over and over and over with these people, and they keep on coming back. And this time, when my guys came to me and said, hey, we think this is bigger than just an everyday arrest. Let's get our federal friends involved. These guys all stand behind me, and I appreciate their effort. And anytime we've called, they're here. They're here that day saying, hey, what can we do for you? And that's what you saw yesterday, what they did for us. I mean, yes, it was our initial investigation. My drug task force did a great job, and I can't commend them enough. But tomorrow and today, they're back out doing the same thing. And for those people, shame on them. And for the people who think that just because we didn't knock on your door yesterday, we're not going to knock on your door today, tomorrow, next week, or next month, or next year, we're coming to get you. And if you want to act that way in Kokomo, Indiana, I'll be happy to open that door for you. And my friends behind me will be right there behind me. And we'll bring in the resources just like yesterday. So I appreciate their help. I couldn't have done it without their help, the citizens of Kokomo and the Kokomo Police Department's Drug Task Force. And yesterday it was a collaborative effort. My whole police department was there. Nobody, I had guys come in off duty to work this operation. We want to be a part of this because we are tired of this in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Very much appreciated. As I discussed earlier, this was a massive federal investigation. A lot of resources were poured into it. Our goal, obviously, was take this organization down top to bottom with strong cases. That sort of work sometimes takes time. It took 4 months. In the middle of this investigation, the city had a couple of black bag guys with guns who were up here to do some horrible things. And so we had to call for help. Luckily, help answered, and that was in the person of your Howard County prosecutor, Mark McCann. Mark?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minkler. I want to just reiterate all the comments of the speakers who have spoke before me, particularly with Chief Baker. I was fortunate enough yesterday to observe this operation, and I want to say it was most impressive. The professionalism, the organization was impeccable. It was something that, I've been doing this 28 years, was a prosecutor for the Drug Task Force, great people, but we don't always have the tools, resources that were brought to us yesterday, and it, again, was impressive. I commend all of you who were involved. I thank you. And I want to echo the thanks to all the agencies which are in your press release, but I want to particularly point out a couple of individuals. One is my Chief Deputy, Ron Bile, who works tirelessly at assisting the Drug Task Force. And I also want to thank those members who are out there and are part of our local Drug Task Force. You do not realize how hard that they work every day to take these dealers of death off your doorstep and remove them from this community. They work tirelessly to see that drugs are taken off this street. I don't think that they're given the credit that they deserve, but I want to give them that credit here today, and I thank all of you. And once again, I thank all of you for your time on behalf of the prosecutor's office and the great citizens of this county. I thank all of you for your effort. Thank you.
I also want to recognize the Miami County Prosecutor Bruce Embry and his Chief Deputy Jeff Servikis for their help and assistance in this case. They're standing up here with me, and I appreciate their assistance, even though I probably didn't pronounce the last name correctly. Sinkovitz. Thank you. With that, we'll take some questions, if you have any.
For the mayor or the police chief, you've got people here in this community who now have lost their drug dealer. What kind of an impact do you expect that to have on your community in the coming days? And what would you say to those people who are trying to buy drugs or addicts?
Well, obviously, you know, the biggest thing is there is help out there. There's agencies out there that we can help these people. We've got 2 great hospitals. You know, if you're having problems, go there. If you're having problems, come and talk to us. We'll get you to that help. That's what I would say. But if you want to continue the criminal aspects to this, then, you know, we're going to get you that help too. You know, I would rather not go there, but that's up to that person. And I understand, you know, drugs, it's tough. I mean, you don't think before you do something when you're drugged up. We know that. But it's just like, you know, it's an epidemic everywhere in the United States, everywhere in the world, pretty much. There's drugs. It's not just Kokomo, Indiana. So, you know, help is there if you want the help. And, you know, I will tell you, my wife's brother lost his life about 12 years ago over prescription drugs. I arrested him. I took him to the hospital. I did everything I could. It didn't matter. He didn't want the help. So, you know.
I just reiterate that you've had federal representatives say seek help, and we've been working locally with and put together systems of care, ran through the Family Service Association. We're just getting that up and running and have a coordinator now, and that's the message, is seek help and seek treatment, and we'll do everything we can here locally to stop the addictions.
And I think what is difficult as is with the issues of drug addiction, you know, the drugs that are being distributed now are much more potent. We talked about fentanyl and how lethal it is. That contributes to the overdoses. And, you know, consider, if you're a drug addict, the issue of whether you want to get help or deal with guys like these. You know, if you're an addict and you can't make money and you're on the slow pay and can't come up with the dollars you owe, you know, they're not going to reason with you. You're dealing with businessmen that enforce their business with violence and credible threats of violence. Anything else?
Quick question about your board over there. I see 19 gunshots, 1 missing, 1 dead. You said 15. Were there some that were arrested prior? And what about the guy that was deceased? What was his?
Some are charged locally and some are charged federally. The individual deceased, I don't know the story on that. Can somebody add to that? Terre Haute?
I think he was shot in a police action shooting.
No.
I'm not sure.
I don't know the backstory on that. We can find out later.
Why do you think they picked Kokomo, Indiana to run this large operation?
There had historically not been, at least in my opinion, the level of federal law enforcement response to these things that there needed to be. I believe the chief and others mentioned that they just underestimated the response they were going to get. Southern District of Indiana is a big area. The state of Indiana is a big area. Obviously, we focus a lot of resources on Indianapolis and our bigger cities. I think they underestimated the will of both the community here in Evansville, the local police department, and federal response. I've been in the office since 1994. This is as big a federal response in this area of the state as I have ever seen.
You know, I don't think they picked Kokomo. I think you got to understand, these people have been here for a long time. They've been intertwined with the community. They've lived here. They just chose to profit off of the drugs. And I think that's what's going on. You know, they just didn't come to Kokomo last week or last month and say, hey, we're going to choose Kokomo. They lived in Kokomo. Like I said, there's not too many people on that board that we haven't put in jail multiple times. And unfortunately, and I don't want to say anything bad about jails or courts or judges or anything like that. They put them in jail. The problem is they get back out. And they're not like you and me. They don't go get a job. Their job is what they were doing before they got in jail. And they're going to go back and they're going to do it. And I think that's what happened. The problem is they picked the wrong agency in the wrong city to expand in. So,
And Chief, if I may add to that, these individuals, I mean, as the Chief said, they're born, raised, they are entrenched in these communities. Why? To elude law enforcement. That's exactly why they do it. It's not like they put a banner out, hey, open for business. All right? This is a criminal organization that doesn't want to draw attention to themselves. All right? So what better way to do it than to come up in your own community? And this is a common thing that we see in drug law enforcement throughout the country. So it's nothing unusual. Thank you.
And certainly the consequences for, as the chief pointed out, repeat offenders are harsh in federal court, necessarily harsh, in my opinion. Many of these people who have 2 or more prior state court convictions for drug trafficking are looking at mandatory life in federal court. So that's why we were extremely patient with this investigation. Many of you know the federal detention statute for these crimes. We'll go into court and ask that they be held without bond. So these guys are not getting back on the streets. They are going to be prosecuted, and we are going to seek the harsh consequences available to us in federal court.
Okay, thank you.